getting closer and closer to welding. All right, let's talk a little bit about some safety equipment. As with all electric welding processes, you need to have a hood, okay? This is an auto darkening hood, and I'm gonna go ahead and leave it fairly low, okay? Somewhere between 9 and 10 is going to be sufficient, all right? I make sure that my screen is relatively nice and clean. And then you also are going to need some gloves, okay? These are a little bit thinner. These are actually MIG welding gloves, but these are a little bit thinner than the big, thick blue or brown gloves that you would typically see. And I have a sweatshirt on, okay? For this process, you don't need a big leather jacket, but you absolutely do need to cover your arms. I'm wearing a sweatshirt, I'm wearing cotton Levi's, and so we don't want to melt our clothing, okay? If I welded in short sleeves or I had my sleeves rolled up, I'm probably not going to burn myself with the heat of the metal, but I'm going to get a radiation burn. I'm going to get basically a version of a sunburn that's not good. So we want to make sure that we always have a long sleeve shirt on. Okay. You can double check, make sure that your welding hood is functioning correctly, and make sure that if you need to, this one is not the case, but some of them that you have an on and off switch. You need to make sure that that's on. So what we're going to do is we're going to start without any filler rod. We're going to start kind of slow first. Okay. Here's one place to remind you of the foot pedal. Remember, we do have a high frequency start. So if I were to accidentally drape this across here and let it lay on my leg, and then I inadvertently put just a tiny bit of pressure on that foot pedal, I can actually get a little bit of a shock. Okay. So I make sure that the torch is not near my body, and then what I like to do is put my foot on the pedal and put a little bit of pressure on my heel and be conscious that I have some pressure on my heel. If I start to relax on my foot, and pretty soon it doesn't take much at all, I just barely move that foot pedal, you can hear we have gas going, and that also means we've got electricity going. So you want to make really conscious effort to keep pressure on the heel when you're not using the torch, okay? I also, this is just my personal preference, I put this whip, the line up and over my shoulder. That way I don't have to hold all of the weight of that whip in my hand, right? I find that works real well. I'm right-handed, and the way that I have found to hold the torch that's fairly comfortable for me is I kind of hold this portion of the torch handle sort of like a pencil, okay? And that way I've got nice dexterity and I can move this along with my hand planted on the table or planted on my workpiece. All right? So, the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put the electrode about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch away from the material. Okay. The angle is, you notice the angle, I'm going to be welding from my right to my left. And so the direction of weld is going to be like this. Okay. So I don't want to have the torch upright, and I don't want to drag the torch like that. So we're actually going to be pushing this along like this. Okay. So what I'm going to do, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get in here, I'm going to put my hood down, I'm going to push on the foot pedal, and I'm going to just create a puddle. And then I'm going to move the puddle along nice and steady. And when I get to the end, I'm going to put pressure on my heel to stop the weld. And then I'm going to leave the torch here because there's a little bit of post flow of gas. All right, so let's give that a shot. This is how I recommend that you learn how to do this. So here we go. Okay, I've developed a puddle, and I'm just going to move that puddle along nice and slow and steady. I'm focusing on puddle. Okay? And then I'm going to put my pressure on my heel, and then I'm going to wait for the post flow to stop, and then I can inspect what I've done. Okay? And so I was at full pedal right there. I was full blast, and that's the end result. Okay, so I didn't add any filler material. You can look at the back. We got pretty hot. Okay. One thing that I forgot to mention about the material is, I don't know if you can notice this, but it's bright and shiny. These two pieces are the exact same material. This one still has the mill scale on it, and this one I took a grinder with a sanding disc and I just cleaned off all that mill scale. TIG welding is very sensitive to being clean, right? So we always want to make sure our material is clean. So let's try that one more time. I'm going to initiate the arc. I'm going to create a puddle, a liquid puddle, and I'm going to move my liquid puddle at a nice constant rate forward. And when I get to the end, I'm going to put pressure on my heel and then leave the torch there for the post flow. And then I can inspect it. And what I want to see is a nice consistent width. And so mine changes a little bit. And so that means that my speed was probably a little bit faster in one area than another. That has been, we've done some off camera. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or so of those. And that's what I want you to do to start. Don't worry about the rod. Just worry about the torch angle, the height, and the foot pedal, and creating an arc and then moving the molten puddle along. Okay? And do that over and over and over again. All right? And then you can see at the end, the last one, the dimension, this direction is nice and consistent. Okay? So just do that over and over and get kind of comfortable. Then once you've done that, then we can add the filler rod, okay? And so the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to establish an arc, just like I did before, establish a puddle, and then I'm just going to dip a little bit of rod into the puddle, and then I'm going to drive the puddle forward with the electrode, then I'm going to dip, drive, dip, drive, dip, drive, so on and so forth, okay? I don't want to touch my rod to the electrode, and I would like to dip it right in the puddle rather than into the arc flow. All right, so let's see if we can do this. You ready? All right, here we go. So I'm going to establish a puddle. I'm going to add to the puddle and move, add, move, add, move, add, move, and so on and so forth. Okay, when I get to the end, I'm still going to pause at the end. And now I've added a little bit of material, and we can look at that, and it's a nice even width. And we've got each one of those little rings is a spot where I've dabbed a little bit of material in. Okay. Notice that I'm not withdrawing the rod really far after each time I dip it. Okay. Okay? And so the next step on your quest is to do that over and over and over and over and over again until you can get nice consistent width and practice. Okay? Going to deburr this and remove the mill scale so we can weld it up. Okay, we are going to, let's do a butt weld. And here's one thing that's real important with TIG welding. We've already talked about cleanliness. It must be clean, so I went ahead and removed the mill scale, deburred the part, made it bright metal. And if you can remember the way that I was just welding, I'm seated, I'm comfortable, and I'm welding from right to left. I always have a plant on the table or on a workpiece. And so the way that I have this material set up right now, it would be really difficult to weld it. It could be done, certainly. It'd be really difficult to weld it like this toward me. So there's no need to do that unless I'm absolutely trapped or I've got a big part or something. So I can move the material around on the table and get it so it's in a position that's going to be comfortable. Okay? We're not going to clamp these parts down. I would recommend clamping these parts down so that they remain flat. Right? So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just tack the two ends. I'm going to attempt to just fusion tack one end, and we'll see if that works. So what I mean by fusion tack is I won't add any other material. We'll just see if we can melt these two pieces of material in just a small tack there. Okay? Here we go. Okay, and as quick as that. All right. Okay, this one I'll do the same thing, but the difference being I'll try to add a little filler material. Okay, and we got a little tack there. Okay. So we're going to give this a shot. This is 1/8 inch material, and this is a 3/32 electrode. My personal preference, I personally like to weld with a little bit smaller tungsten electrode. I just find that I have a little bit more control of that. So this should work pretty well. So same thing, we're going to initiate or start an arc. We're going to create a puddle, and then we're going to dip material just like we did on our previous welds, but this time we're going to do it on a seam. Okay, here we go. And I started thinking about something else. My mind wandered a little bit, and it's evident in the weld. So I started off real nice. I started thinking about something else, and then I got back on track. All right. You want to try it one more time? Let's do one more time. So the difference here is you have to pay real close attention to making sure you're melting both pieces equally. All right, here we go. Okay, so I got a little zigzag there. What I noticed is at one point the weld wasn't flowing quite right, and so I had to pause and try to drive that puddle around a little bit. Okay, and it's not the prettiest thing in the universe, but again, just like we did with the torch with no rod, just a flat weld with rod, I would recommend you just go one after the next, and practice these until you're absolutely bored, but really good with that pattern. Okay.